Hi, welcome to Tales from the Sky Lounge. It's a podcast about business, consulting, and venture investing. We get out there in the world, we talk to people who are making it happen, and we get their stories. And if you could like and subscribe, it really helps us get our message out. Today's guest in the Sky Lounge is Jeff Haynie. Hey, Jeff. How are you?
How you doing, bud?
Hey, it's been a long time.
It's been a while.
Yeah. So, Jeff, who are you, and what are you working on?
Who am I? I guess I would describe myself as a serial entrepreneur, technologist, innovator. I'm working on a new company, one of many, but yet another company that I'm started recently, about 7 weeks ago. And I'm working on this sort of intersection of software intelligent agents or AI agents and kind of human ingenuity, and how do you sort of blend those two things together and create a cloud platform for running and executing these really interesting agents.
Very cool. And we'll definitely get to AI and agents and your thoughts on that. But the first thing you said that was really cool and why I love talking to you is you're a repeat serial entrepreneur. So you definitely got the disease, right?
I do. Yeah. I keep doing it over and over and over. That's the definition of sanity, I think.
Yeah. And then, so when I met you, you were getting Appcelerator going, which was you were one of the first people to kind of get your mind around JavaScript back when it was really janky and weird and needed some wrangling. Y'all figured out how to write once and deploy everywhere. How did you want to tell us a story about Appcelerator? I mean, that was a pretty cool company.
Yeah, Appcelerator was my third venture-backed startup. And I started actually in Atlanta, and I had a company in Atlanta called Vocalocity, and it was a telecom company. And we were sort of trying to do web technology for telephony and, this thing called Voice XML and CCXML and things like that. And then, so it was a similar concept. We sort of ended up after that exit, me and another engineer were like wanting to work on mobile type things, and the iPhone hadn't yet come out. But we were, the sort of technology called Ajax, or some kind of a pattern, not really a technology, was kind of starting to get really big. This was 2006. And so kind of these kind of web 2.0 apps now, that's what they were being called back then, where, Gmail had just kind of come out and people were trying to figure out how to do more dynamic applications in the web on the browser. JavaScript was sort of very, like you said, janky. It was only in the browser. It was very light stuff. And we started this thing called Appcelerator and created this product called Titanium because we were trying to build an app. We actually got access to the App Store through a customer, or not the App Store, but the SDK that Apple was going to eventually come out with. And we were trying to build an app, and we were running into this Objective-C and trying to figure, and we had done a bunch of C++ and Java, so we sort of were somewhat familiar, but we were like, this got to be a web way to do this. And could we apply JavaScript? And we sort of came up with this idea that, we created this sort of open source runtime where we could take JavaScript, which up until that time had been in the browser, and can we kind of bring it to the server and make it kind of a client technology and sort of client from a mobile browser, and then also on the server, which was still Node hadn't come out yet, or any of those things hadn't even, become a thing yet. And that's sort of how it started. It was like, can we leverage all this web technology, all these web, developers, millions of web developers in the world, instead of doing C++ and Objective-C and Java and all these things, can we leverage all that? And we, and it just took us a while. It took us a few years to sort of get the technology where we could transpile JavaScript down to native code and then execute it on a small iOS device, Android device, etc. And that was how it was sort of the born of Titanium, which was an open source project that became really popular. It was a predecessor to things that React or React Native today, but it was a much longer predecessor. And through that and through a bunch of things that I had eventually moved to Mountain View, California, right when we started the company from Atlanta. I gotten sort of very involved in the Silicon Valley ecosystem and a bunch of kind of companies and individuals at that time that were working on a lot of different areas of Node and browser. And we acquired a company called Aptana, and they were doing some stuff on the server side and had a bunch of patents. And so we just sort of like just had a group of people, and we all just sort of worked on this titanium thing and kind of built this, this technology. And it became pretty big. Honestly, it got really, really big. I think when we sold, I think we were over 1 million developers in our ecosystem. And, I think it was 150, 200,000 apps in the App Store that were built on our platform, 1 billion downloads. So it's a pretty big footprint, and we learned a lot. We made a lot of mistakes. It's a 10-year journey, raised quite a lot of money to kind of execute that vision. And today it's very normal. This is a very normal ecosystem, TypeScript and JavaScript dominate the world, but that wasn't clear in 2006, 2007.
Yeah. I'm getting chills thinking about it. I haven't worked on it. I mean, back then it was like, Adobe had a thing, that you had to build, and then it was like Java craplets or applets.
Craplets. Yeah.
Java, right? And then
Java.
Yeah. Yeah. Heavyweight. And then none of that was great, and I'm just going, oh God, I'm so glad we don't have to deal with all that stuff now. So standing on the shoulders of giants, here you are right here. I think, it's a time gone by, but it's important work foundationally, and I've kind of kept up with that whole, lineage, was it Cordova, PhoneGap, and then Ionic kind of had a run at it for a minute.
That's right.
And then I'm not sure what it is today or kind of where things are going.
Today, it's kind of React Native or, Swift if you're, or Kotlin if you're kind of still in the native world. I think that's kind of the du jour. I think React Native still is for most apps, not all apps, you're building a heavyweight gaming. You're going to use, a game sort of studio product like Unity. But yeah, for like most applications, React Native's pretty good, actually. I mean, it's not, it wasn't as good as, Titanium in our opinion. Obviously Titanium had a kind of an end of life after we got acquired, and, they tried for 2 or 3 years to kind of continue it on. The company that acquired us, Axway. But, like a lot of technologies, it's, the soul of the technology and, kind of moves on, and the world kind of moves on, and it's kind of hard to kind of continue to invest.
Remind me, I think you guys were on that moving map in the intro sequence to Silicon Valley at one point. Yeah. You had your pin. Yeah.
The whole time. It's a funny story. It was the second season, is when it came out. The first season, it wasn't there, but the second season, all the way to the finale, we were the only, I think at the time, we were the only private company on the map, on the opening scene. And we get questions all the time, like, did we pay for that? Or and it's like, I tell people, no, I think it's just someone in our community. I never found out. They never reached out to us. We were involved in a separate series on Bravo called Silicon Valley also. And so we're not sure. I mean, they're not related because they're different producers and writers, but it was a Silicon Valley thing. I'm not sure how it happened. But yeah, it's pretty cool. Cool lore. Still, when you go back and watch it.
Yeah. And then for you, it's every day. Hey, we're grinding. Oh, by the way, you're on TV. Oh, that's cool.
Exactly.
Back to grinding, right?
Exactly.
Then you kind of sometimes don't appreciate that till you're kind of out of the mix. And then, so you're in Mountain View, like in the thick of it, when a lot of really cool things are coming online. Maybe talk about, what's that like? Tell us the story, Grandpa, about raising money in the heyday of Silicon Valley when the web was getting going. And, what is that like, West Coast versus probably the rest of the country, for a fundraising?
Yeah. And not to open sore wounds, but, I had sort of like moved from Atlanta. I'd done a couple of venture-backed Silicon Valley startups in Atlanta and just sort of grown frustrated. I think I just talked to a number. I'd been out to Silicon Valley a lot and visiting and board meetings and meeting with my investors. And I think at one point, one of my investor friends was like, I won't say who it is, very famous VC, but like he just said, you need to move to Silicon Valley. This makes no sense, while you're in Atlanta. And so it really weighed on me. And I'd already had, prior to that, a decade of challenges, trying to raise money and build a company and get the support systems and the employees and all that. And so Yeah, I just sort of up and moved. Me and my co-founder just uprooted our family one day after a long trip to Silicon Valley, and we just said, "Fuck this! We're going to Atlanta. We're going to move from Atlanta. We're just going to move." And I had just I think at the time I just had my second child, and we'd only been married a few years, and my co-founder, they had just gotten married, I think literally that year or maybe right before then, and so it was sort of like we just packed up and moved on a whim. And we raised money, to be fair, we had just raised the Series A. Back then, Series A was the seed round. There weren't really seed rounds. We called them angel rounds, and they were small checks, not massive, checks that you see today. So it was like, we just raised a little bit of money. We had this titanium thing that we, hadn't caught fire yet, but we had a really decent idea of like what we wanted to go do. We moved our family to Mountain View. And that was 2007. And then 2008 crash happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, it was a scary time, even in the Bay Area, in the Valley. It was a kind of scary time. We were lucky. We had just raised a bunch of money, and we were heads down in founder mode, and we were building titanium. So like we were, in some ways, we were, kind of immune to sort of all the issues that were happening. And then, it sort of, I would say the Bay Area probably bounced back faster. It sort of has this like, swing factor. I think, things happen way faster there, like the bad and the good. And maybe they reverberate for the rest of the world, maybe a little slower, if you will. But like, at least that was my experience. So, and then, like 2008, as we kind of moved into 2009, we were on a roll. We had launched Titanium at the first WWDC, with Apple. Our community was starting to really build. We started getting sort of lots of excitement and interest in the Bay Area from people we were meeting. We didn't know anybody at the time. I mean, we had some VCs that we knew, but like we didn't have a network. So we started building a network, and that was, I would say, is a bit of a go-go period. I think 2008, prior to the pandemic, I mean, it was a fun place to be. I mean, there was a lot of innovation and a lot of really, really smart people. Y Combinator was just down the street, and there was just a lot, the Carlson brothers had just started Stripe. I mean, there's all the who's names of companies today that, everybody knows. But back then they were just, founders like any other founder, and everybody, and, the Bay Area is a small place, honestly, not just physically a small place, but it's a really relatively small place of much like a lot of cities. Atlanta's a pretty small community. Everybody kind of knows everybody. And I'd say the Bay Area is a similar place. The Silicon Valley, there's a lot more success there. So you get kind of the extremes, I think, there. You can run into someone that just sort of is a normal person when you meet them, and you just start talking to them, and then you find out they were a founder that sold their company for, $1 billion or something. And, you just don't, you run into them and you have a conversation like, it's just a normal person. You would expect it to be different, but it's not. It's just a normal sort of circumstances. So I was there for about 11 years. I had a phenomenal opportunity to meet the who's who of the world in technology. And it's a really special place. I ended up moving, just before COVID, to Austin. I tend to not like to stay in a place more than 10 to, 11, 12 years. I don't know why. It's just an itch, I guess, much like starting a company. It's sort of an itch. I like to be in different places. I lived all over the world. So, it's a cool place. It's a really interesting place. Like I said, it's a really small place, as big as it is, and as crazy as it is. It's a really small place. It's kind of easy when you're when you're there to meet people. It's actually pretty easy. I think when you're outside of the Bay Area, like my experience now living both in and out multiple times, it's a bit harder, probably. Although the world, going online's made it a little bit easier, I think. But yeah, it's a pretty cool place. It's a unique place.
So you're in Austin now. Okay. So in Austin is you're kind of a trendsetter. is the thing I'm picking up on here. But Austin's got a cool culture, right? And then South by Southwest, right, is over there, and a lot of tech is moving in. I think Elon Musk, came in with really smart people. And,
Joe Lonsdale's here now. The ABC guys are here. I mean, there's a ton of there's a ton of Silicon Valley has moved here, and there's a ton of, like you said, Big tech. I mean, Cloudflare's got a huge presence here. Mongo's got a huge presence here. It's a big second city to Silicon Valley or New York, I think, for as a tech hub. I think Facebook's huge here. Google's huge here. So you've got, you've got the bigger, mature, anchor kind of, companies that have big presences here. And so that brings obviously a lot of supporting, technology. And it's a really easy gateway. Southwest has a really nice flight, goes back and forth. We call it the Tesla flight, but like, there's like a really easy commuting flight to San Jose that happens, a couple times a day. So it's kind of easy to kind of get, back and forth. And yeah, it's a really nice, cool place. And it has a bunch of things that maybe I would say Silicon Valley doesn't have. It has like you said, the music culture is really big here. The food culture is really big here. It's got F1. So there's like a whole other sort of world. It's really interesting and fun. And so, yeah, it's a pretty neat place.
Well, and do you feel like, I feel like, the Silicon Valley that was, in the .com era and then, the early 2000s, that was really special. Go. A lot of really cool companies got in, got founded, got big. And then you had a fall on wave, the Stripes of the world. You feel like, Austin is kind of on that same trajectory right now? Does it feel like those early days, like it's definitely on the ascendancy, that we're going to see some really cool things come out of Austin organically?
I think so. I think that people underestimate, like, the Bay Area is a really interesting and special place. And I don't want to be like, I've sort of seen the good and the bad. So I'm not like a converted religious zealot about Silicon Valley. Obviously I've lived in, multiple cities, but it's a really special place because it's got a confluence of capital. It's got a confluence of really, really smart, innovators and risk takers. And it's got a lot of like what's missing. A lot of people talk about founders and they talk about investors, and those are kind of like very important, obviously, parts of the ecosystem. But I say the other two pieces that it has that a lot of other cities don't have, even when they have capital and founders, it's got a support staff of people that come and work at these companies. They're not the founders, but they're the first 100, 200, 300 employees that, move from these different companies and take all this knowledge and experience, into these startups and help them grow. And then it's got service providers, honestly. And again, sometimes we sort of maybe poo-poo lawyers and accountants and all those types of people, but they're a really important part of the ecosystem, especially the ones that understand how to take a small idea to a growth startup, IPO, public company, world domination, whatever. And there's just not a lot of those outside of Silicon Valley. Again, it's not to denigrate great work that's being done all over the world, but there's like a special lexicon, a special language, a special way and process that these companies get built. That, capital obviously is part of that. And clearly the founder and their idea and sort of their vision is clearly, the important part of that ingredient. But I wouldn't discount all the other stuff. And I didn't appreciate that as much. I thought it was about, I thought these other cities were about lack of capital, access to capital was the problem. And sure, that's true. But also like, that first or second engineer that you hire, or that first or second marketer that you hire, I mean, I'd say Appcelerator, I give as much credit to Scott Schwarzkopf, who was our first chief marketing officer, VP of marketing. I'd give him as much credit. He's now over at Craft Ventures, I think, still, and, done some phenomenal stuff, after Appcelerator, but like, I give him as much credit. He'd worked at startups before. He knew all kinds of stuff. He'd worked at Microsoft. He kind of knew how to do the marketing in a kind of Silicon Valley way that I didn't know when I moved there. And, honestly, I give him as much credit for, like the growth and success of Appcelerator and the brand that we created and all that. I mean, it was sort of these people that we attracted and we had the opportunity, and those people were in Silicon Valley. They weren't going to move, and so I don't know that, so, again, Austin's, what's happening, after COVID, I think, or maybe I'd say before COVID, with COVID, maybe a better way of saying it. What happened was it gave permission for a lot of people to leave the Bay Area because they had to, right? And then once they were able to leave and life kind of went on, I don't mean life in like the personal stuff, because in a lot of cases that got enhanced for a lot of people, myself included. Moving to Austin was a huge, quality of life improvement, like in every way for my family and me and like quality of life. But also like just like the digital professional life, you know, the Silicon Valley life that you sort of live in. And I've talked to people that were in New York and moved to Miami and other places as well. And it's a similar thing, right? It's like life just kind of went on. Like you didn't, even a lot of the Sand Hill Road VCs in Silicon Valley, you know, moved out or moved to, you know, San Francisco or took the advantage. And so once that happened, I think, you know, a lot of things kind of opened up, and a lot of people that I know that said they would never leave the Bay Area have left now, which I think is an interesting trend. I do think you're going to continue to see some repatriation back to the Bay Area with AI. I'm getting a little FOMO on that because there's a lot of really great people and there's a lot of really great stuff happening right now.
Right.
And you can't discount people that are kind of adjacent and the proximity of like talent, even like talent that's not necessarily working together, but like working on similar things. I don't think we could have ever built Titanium the way we ended up building it. Not that we had to be in the Bay Area necessarily, but I think the way we ended up building it, because of all the smart people, not just at Appcelerator, but all the ecosystem around us, all doing similar things and meeting and talking and, you know, all those. I don't think we could have done it if we weren't there at the time.
You know, I was at Sienna right around Y2K. You know, we bought a couple different companies. I think we bought 3 companies in the Bay Area. You know, so I got to go out there a lot and participate in the culture. And I think it really is the little things. So let me bounce something off you. So one of the things I thought that was really cool is when you have a need, like the culture, the community helps steer you toward that. Hey, I need a JavaScript engineer. Hey, I need a lawyer. Hey, I need a founder. Hey, I need an investor. And then you get, like you just mentioned, hey, I need, and then all of a sudden now you got like 5 phone calls tonight and 2 lunches tomorrow that are going to happen. And it like, that's to me, that's a unique part of the spice. And then, you know, hopefully that culture transplant, you know, will continue, you know, as people kind of come in and out of that culture and then go back to their respective, you know, hometowns or wherever it is they go next, like you did. You know, I think you take a little bit of that with you, right?
That's correct. It's hard to kind of explain to people that haven't been inside of it, but while everybody's fiercely competitive, it's more co-opetition because even like people that are fiercely competitive probably know each other pretty well and probably share ideas and trade employees and, you know, all kinds of like innovation. It's a sort of an interesting place, like, where you just never know who the person that you're working with, what they're going to do. You know, so like it's like and you know, what's changed in some years I hear, but like there's, at least while I was there, it was an extreme form of meritocracy in a lot of ways. Like, you know, just didn't care. People just didn't care. I mean, you could literally, my co-founder Nolan used to like walk, he used to see Mark Zuckerberg back in those days. He lived literally like 2 streets over from Mark when they were in Palo Alto. And he walked by every single day and you'd see Steve Jobs at the Coupa Cafe, or, you know, back in those days. It was just not, it was not an insular place in some ways at all. People were very accessible, and like trading of information and everybody helping each other out. And even, like I said, competitor, like it was just, yeah, of course you're competing. And, you know, like we always thought that was, you know, everybody has a better mousetrap than the next person, but it's just different. I'd say like in other cities, it's a little bit like, oh, you're doing this, I can't tell you anything about what I'm working on. It's like, well, you know, like everybody knows everybody. My wife used to run she ran a women's, exercise studio, at Los Altos, and kind of in the middle of a lot of the stuff. And like, she'd come home and say, oh yeah, I saw so-and-so and her husband, if you remember, is the VC. And, you know, he's going to talk to you at the game on Saturday. You know, it was just partly why I left too, honestly, because after a while it kind of gets old. Like everything is a mono. Everything's about, you know, the next thing and the next fundraise and the next whatever. And that sometimes can get old a little bit. And you know, Austin's a lot less about tech, as much as tech's big here. It's like the smallest part of Austin, I'd say, in a lot of ways. So there's a lot more sort of diversity and like other things. I got kind of tired of always talking about my startup and always being compared to like the next cool founder thing that, you know, was happening. And that gets a little old too.
Yeah. Well, so let's kind of tell me the end of the story of Appcelerator Titanium. You know, so you had obviously a lot of success. At some point you decide, okay, did you get an offer? Did you decide to sell? Like, how does that conversation work? You know, tell us that story. You know, what happens?
another interesting thing, and again, this is probably, I don't, it's probably part of the sort of the way it works, if you will, in the Bay Area. But we got an offer to buy 2009, and we'd only been less than a year old, a little bit less than a year old, or a year from our Series A, more accurate. We'd only been there about a year, a little bit more than a year. And we started getting offers to buy the company. And again, it kind of comes back down to everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows what everybody's working on to some degree. And you're kind of like 1 or 2 degree separation from most everyone. And so we very early on, and I don't think it's a good thing. This is probably a lesson learned, but like we early on started getting a lot of like inquisitive from a lot of people, a lot of very well-known big companies, and partly that's how I built my network. Frankly, is with some amazing people, just because all of a sudden, especially when you're a hot kind of thing, everybody wants to know you, and it's easy access. You were saying earlier, like you're always one call. Oh, you need to meet so and so. You need to be shot new over to Adobe. And then, 2 days later, you're like sitting there, meeting these people, and like having conversations. And you're, from my perspective, I was like, I'm just a nobody, like there's a billion companies here, but like you're doing important stuff and you're kind of a little bit on the cutting edge. People want to meet you, and there's a lot of like really interest, not just like acquisition. So, we started getting a lot of really early on. So all along the life cycle of the 10-year company journey, every year we were having lots of conversations. We were raising, but that was also, around every year, as a Silicon Valley, and certainly most VC-backed companies, not just Silicon Valley, but like certainly in Silicon Valley, you're raising money every year. That's kind of like track you're on, if you will. It's sort of like, moving through an academic program, it's like, all right, you're graduating now to your Series B, and, it's about that time, it's sort of like, it's geared differently. So, and those are usually the times that you're having conversations, right? It's like, well, we're having a fundraising event coming up. There's going to be you're sort of always in that kind of conversation. At least we were. What happened was a couple of years before we started getting there was a couple of really serious, like we went pretty far the distance with a couple of large, I won't name them now, but software companies that you would know by name. They ended soft and things like that. And so we started, talking to these usual suspects in like really serious ways. And they started getting really serious, and we were starting to go like, what's the longevity of this? We were built, the company had gotten much larger. We'd raised a lot more money. Our problems got much difficult because they started, the problems started becoming like, how do you continue to monetize? How do you scale a sales team? Like we'd raised a bunch of money, and we were just having those very typical difficulties in going from a zero revenue company to a much bigger revenue company. And I was spending all of my time traveling all over the world. And, that's interesting. Back to the interesting stories of like travel. Like, back then you had to be in front of people. I mean, that's how you sold. I had to speak at conferences. There wasn't a lot of Zoom. Zoom wasn't even a thing. I was traveling, a couple hundred days a year at the peak, and all over the world. We had offices, and we had an office in Singapore. We had an office in China. We had an office in London. We had an office, obviously Bay Area. We had an office in San Francisco. So, we had a big thing in Brazil. So I was traveling all over. And so those kind of confluence of lots of interest, harder to scale the company. New competitors were coming out. Xamarin, was a big competitor. Eventually got bought by Microsoft. A better fit than we were, because they were C# and a .NET kind of thing. We were JavaScript and open source and sort of that world. And so those sort of conversations continued, like we didn't materialize them for a couple of different reasons, but we continued to have lots of acquisition of it. And then eventually, we had, the summer we sold, or we announced the following spring in January, but the summer is when that kind of all happened. We ended up hiring an investment banker because all right, this is going to probably get pretty serious. And that's kind of what happened. And the first kind of like the company that started the process, ended up not getting the deal, and we ended up going to another company. But that was sort of how it transpired. At that point, we were 10 years in, we retired. We weren't sure how things were going to play out. We had probably should have sold a couple of times before, honestly, to be really, I mean, the outcome was okay. People made money, but like, we could have probably had a better outcome if we'd have sold maybe a year before.
Yeah, but you don't know. You don't know.
But you never know.
Right.
Life's hard to look back in reverse.
Right. So it sounds like you're very intentional. You kind of looked at your clock and said, okay, it's time. We did pretty good. Don't want to go much past this, growth point, and it's time for somebody else to take it and do something bigger with it. And then, okay, so now you're fat, dumb, and happy. You did your earn out, probably.
Yep. Yeah, I did a year at the earn out. Yeah, that was interesting.
Okay. Yeah. And that's always a weird time because it's kind of your baby, but it's kind of not your baby.
That's
and,
right. That was very, very difficult for me.
You're in a weird, broom closet type situation, where.
Well, and what was interesting is like, I think every founder that sells has this issue, but like it was extremely more difficult, I think, because we had a community that we also worried about. So it wasn't just our customers, like, the actual paying customers. It was also the larger community, which was very large and influential in a lot of ways that we were mostly worried about because we just knew without the community, there was nothing here. Like you can buy the assets and the people around, the company, but like if you don't really take care of the community, then that can evaporate overnight. And that's kind of ultimately what happened. It took a couple of years. But
okay. So now you did your earn out and now you got a little bit of money. So what goes through the mind of an entrepreneur? How bored did you get before you kind of got itchy and jumped into something else?
Yeah, I started Pinpoint, which was a complete failure, but I started Pinpoint at Appcelerator, or at the Acquire Axway, because like we at that time we were there a little less than a year, me and the co-founder, and we knew we were going to do another company. Clearly, and we kind of came up with the idea actually at this company because like we went from being a multi-100 person company to a multi-1,000 person company, and we saw the same problems, but just at a much bigger scale about like how efficient is R&D and like what's going on with R&D and like how do we understand like, engineering productivity. And so, I had openly talked to the CEO and of the acquiring company about kind of some of these problems. And I said, I think I'm going to start a company around this. And they were very gracious. Honestly, they knew they weren't going to keep us long. And so they were super gracious and they were very helpful. They even offered to invest in the company and,
cool.
Incubate it and whatever. And that, like we were like, we don't really need that. Like we're not getting anything from that. So appreciate it, but no. And that's kind of what we sort of left, so we didn't have any time to rest because literally, as soon as our vesting was done and as soon as like our contract was up, and we'd been having those conversations, a quarter before. So it was totally open board about it. We started the company, we left and literally started the company the next day and started, and raised money pretty much right out of the gate, kind of walking away. That journey was another few years of trying to, it was right before COVID. So, a couple of years before COVID. So it was like an interesting journey. But like we started that company in Silicon Valley, me and the co-founder. It was our kind of third company. We've been 20 years working together. A couple of years into it, we sort of decided to split. He kind of wanted to go in a different direction. And we'd been working together a long time, and it was sort of like, well, maybe we should try some things apart. And, he kind of wanted to go in a different direction with the idea that we were going. And I wanted to kind of go in a separate direction. And, it was very amicable, but like we sort of went different ways. He kind of took the idea that we had and went in a different direction. I think the company's still around today, raised money and kind of has gone off its own direction. We tried this other direction, through COVID. COVID created all kinds of problems, and we sort of ended up acqui-hiring into another Bessemer company a couple of years later. And that's where I spent the last 2.5 years with them, and kind of took the team over there and hired a bunch of people that I'd worked with in the past and a bunch of new people, and helped ShopMonkey, which is a vertical SaaS software company in the automotive solution space, doing really well. Great company, great founding team. And so kind of came in and helped them kind of take it to the next level and especially on their platform. And through that journey is where, I started getting more involved in. At Pinpoint, we were doing AI, But this was prior to LLMs. That's prior to OpenAI and ChatGPT and all the cool stuff that we have today. It was like the old school AI. It was like hire, PhD data scientists and do PyTorch and build your own models.
Done that.
And that was really hard. And it was very expensive, and we couldn't quite get Pinpoint to work in a lot of different ways, technically and like the business model go to market as well. And so like we couldn't quite figure out how to get the go to market fit. We had a lot of interest, raised a bunch of money, but couldn't quite get that to work. But we knew there was something there. And we knew AI was going to be pretty big. I mean, we had a pretty good idea, but we didn't know the LLMs are going to like come along, obviously. So that 2.5 years at ShopMonkey, towards the end of that, me and another co-founder here started doing a lot more in AI and thinking a lot more about AI post OpenAI and ChatGPT, frankly. But we weren't going to probably be able to do, we weren't, ShopMonkey is a different company. I wasn't a founder. I was CTO and they had a kind of a different trajectory as a business. And, we were just sort of like, we're itching to kind of do something in agents because we had this sort of idea that agents are going to be really big, AI agents, as we move from sort of highly deterministic software to non-deterministic software. And with LLMs and like what the sort of the understanding of like English, and like task orientation, we felt like there was a really interesting opportunity. And we felt like the opportunity was very similar to Titanium. It was sort of like, how do we take JavaScript? How do we enable, the web platform to be able to build agents in a really simple way, both on the development side as well as the kind of runtime cloud execution side, much like we did with Titanium on the iPhone, obviously a different form factor. And that was sort of the genesis of the idea was there's got to be a huge opportunity here to build. There's going to be, way more agents than there are apps. I mean, maybe there's 500,000 apps that have been built on the App Store, and there's going to be that many agents probably in the next 12 months. I mean, so like the cardinality of agents is like way, way larger than apps or APIs or websites, frankly. And so that we just felt like there's a huge opportunity there, and we just need to go spend all of our energy thinking and executing on that. And that's kind of what we did earlier this year. We kind of launched the new company. We raised $4 million, in a seed round, and we're sort of off to the races. This is our 8th week at the end of this week. And
what's the name of the company for the record?
The name of the company is called Agentuity. Okay. We wanted to combine sort of the human ingenuity and craftiness and innovation of the human spirit with kind of the software intelligence of agents that we think is going to be what the future is going to be. It's sort of a combination of like the best of human ingenuity and intelligence with agents, with software automation.
Yeah. I think you're right on. It's just fun the way your engineer brain works. Like you're working the problem. You're like, okay, we're going to find a thing. Let's, try to get a solution for it. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, let's kind of iterate a little bit, try another little angle here. And then, you're right in the middle of the gold rush at this point. Everybody and their brothers got a bunch of agents. How you manage them, it's going to be a mess. Right. So, I think that's going to be a huge thing for us. Maybe talk about, AI seems to be this kind of fairy dust that people are throwing on a lot of things. LLMs are important technology, obviously. How do you speak English so that sounds good and authoritative? How do you understand English or other languages, I guess, is important as well. And then understand intents and then route them through this agent, maze is going to be important. You've seen a lot of coding tools come and go. We've seen no code, low code, 4G, report builder, all that stuff. Here we go again with the coding agents. Yeah. What are your thoughts on, do we all got to get us some cursor licenses and go for it? Or what does that look like for the future?
Yeah, I'm super bullish. I'd say my baseline is like, here's sort of my sort of way to think about it. I think that we're going to shift from right today, where we sit right now today, March 25th, 2025. I think we're in the middle of a transition from human directed AI assisted. That's kind of where we're at. That's been the last, you could probably argue 10 years of auto intelligence. Not really AI. AI has been the last year of that. Like there's really, maybe 2 years of Copilot, what GitHub did. But like that sort of is the first truly AI assisted to the human, like writing code. We're going to shift, I think, in the next 1 year, maybe a little less, maybe a little longer, from AI driven human assisted. So I think that's going to kind of flip flop again, not for every application, not for every developer, but like in general tasks. And that's not low code. That's different. That's not no code, low code. That might be no code from a developer writing the code, but it's not no code. There's still going to be a lot of code, AI generated code, with human, again, review, human in the loop, human assisted, human directed in the sense of at least like what to go do. And then I think probably maybe, 2 to 5 years out, we're probably going to go to fully autonomous. Again, unevenly distributed. It'll start in certain areas, not 100%. And it'll take a while for, we're not going to go back in time and rewrite old stuff, but certainly everything kind of greenfield going forward. And maybe some brownfield stuff will get rewritten. And I think that's the transition. And so the question that I ask, and a lot of us ask around here, is like, how much of Cursor is a transition to the future? It's a question mark. I don't have the answer, but like my what I would posit is like a lot of like what's going on right now is the bridge to the next thing, right? It's not the thing. I don't think Cursor is the thing. And this is not knocking Cursor. We're big users of Cursor. We pay for it. We're big users of a lot of that type of technology, like Devon we use dramatically. We use Cursor. Obviously we use all the LLM stuff directly as well. We built a bunch of agents I'll maybe talk a little bit about, but I do think that like, so then the question mark is like, what is the next thing? And the question mark is, I think the other question that a lot of people, it's the death of programming. It's sort of sick of the death of everything, right?
Right.
And I don't think that typically happens. Like most of technology evolution, it certainly shifts things, right? I mean, we don't, ride horses to the city center anymore, the town center anymore. Doesn't mean horses went away, but, and certainly, so I do think that probably, the question mark is like, what happens? And I think probably what happens is the floor rises and the ceiling rises. I think it's kind of typically what happens. And I think the middle maybe gets crunched a little bit. So I think the bottom end, if you will, of software programming, those tasks go away in a lot of ways, meaning like they probably go to automation. But like a lot of things on the web have gone to automation, that we don't do anymore. Like, CI/CD being one of them. We used to have release engineers that actually did the build.
Yeah.
Right. And then they staged the build and then they reviewed the build and then they wrote like we don't even have that anymore. We have CI/CD now. Right. So there's a lot of things that like in technology, the skills shift to something more productive and high yield. So I think that will continue. The top end, I think, again, doesn't go anywhere. I think the top end probably gets more smarter, more sophisticated, much more enabled by AI to do like more interesting and important work, and sort of unleashes the question then is the middle. What happens? Does the middle compress? Does it get bigger? I don't know. I do think there's a lot of these tools expand people's capabilities, bring more people into the ability to have more power. And that's sort of my belief. So does Cursor sort of, how did they navigate, and using Cursor as an example is WinServe. There's, a ton of these out there, but like, what is that end state for them? I think they're pretty smart. And if you already notice, like, whether it's Cursor or even whether it's the new GPT models that are coming out from OpenAI or Anthropic, those are all built around agents. It's not really LLMs natively, the frontier model itself doing everything. What you have is a consortium of agents that are sitting in front of the LLMs. And that's what creates this sort of the feeling of intelligence is the agents using the LLM in a really smart way, to create, these sort of, much more intelligent experiences, much more lifelike or human-like type experiences that you're seeing. You don't think of it like as an agent, but that's what they actually are. Cursor is a whole bunch of agents sitting on top of an LLM that really has gotten very good at how to create a pull request. There's an agent that's gotten really good about how to like diff the code and figure out what went wrong or how to read the documentation. And so that's what we believe the future is going to be, is like millions and millions of these agents that are highly tuned around very, very narrow tasks that know how to work together, much like humans do.
So just reflecting on that, so I've been frustrated over the years, so to kind of extend on your titanium, Adobe had this, I can't remember what they called it, but, it was a visual builder for UIs that you could click and drag, and that was awesome, right? And then, but they had this weird language you had to run it in a container, so it was almost there, but it wasn't. And then it was like I don't know, another one just Ionic kind of came and went, right? But they had this visual builder, and then there was a couple flickers where you had like back end agents, and then you could think about what does my business objects look like, and then like Firebase is kind of like going that way too, and I'm just like looking for the thing that's going to pull all this stuff together. Man, I don't want to think about the back end database. I want to think about I know what the front end's supposed to look like. I don't want to spend a lot of time coding it up. But I'm really sensitive to, hey, give me a quick, hit, and then let me edit, that I could do that very quickly. But then, hey, that's a good proof of concept. I feel like I could bang out, a small early, 1.0 pretty quick single-handedly if I had the right set of tools. I feel like we're almost there, but there's always something kind of, and then, yeah. But then, like you said, brownfield, or why can't we? What's stopping us from unleashing a bunch of agents on the IRS code that's still running COBOL on a mainframe? Going, dude, just go figure it out, rewrite it.
I think that's actually a huge opportunity. As an example, there's a buddy of mine, and again, I won't name him, but a buddy of mine in Atlanta that's working with a government institution doing this around old security rules. For an old product, and they're using AI to rewrite them, to modernize them into like the newer kind of security language, security rules language. And I think there's a lot of like low hanging fruit, and that's a perfect task for LLM. I think especially old code, like where there's a large corpus of data on how to do it, documentation online. It's really good at those types of tasks. We use a product called Devin that we really love. Is an AI coding agent, and we use it. Like all of our change notes, change logs are all now written by AI. Like as soon as it sees that we have a set of agents that as soon as we see a pull request, a merge on a release, it automatically goes, creates a pull request, writes the documentation, writes the change log and all of that. And so I think you're going to see a lot more of these kind of, like I said, lower end tasks that get automated away very quickly. And then the question is like, how does it move up the stack, if you will? And I don't mean physically up the stack, but like, how does it kind of get smarter? And I think we're going to see, a dramatic improvement. Right now it's better, like right now, most of the agents the coding agents aren't great with super large code bases. Like they have a harder time understanding. I think what we're seeing, one of the benefits right now of us starting from scratch is we don't have a large code base. We started with, from the beginning, and we started coding with AI in mind from the beginning. So it's interesting when you start new things with AI from the beginning, you write code differently. And you use the AI differently. And so I think there's going to be a bit of a time transit. Now, I think AI is going to figure this out. I think the next year they're going to figure a lot of these types of issues out. But yeah, I think it's sort of like the low hanging fruit, I think, is like the easy things are easy to like repetitively automate. It's very clear deterministically how to like, I was working on a thing this morning around a PowerShell thing in Windows for some installer thing I was working on. And it was like this old, like MSI XML thing.
No.
Yeah. But like the AI knew everything about it. Like it's old, right? So like it just knew how to do all the stuff. And I was like, I just needed to do these 3 things. And it was like, yep.
Yeah.
And it worked. And it just worked from the beginning, right? And that's like a perfect example of like, I don't want to go learn. I could go Google it. I could figure it out. It would take me several hours to figure it out, and like some back and forth. The AI was like, boom, I'll just do it for you. And so I think like, those are kind of like the junior engineer type things right now. I think, how long till it becomes a principal engineer, like a really senior engineer? I just think it's a matter of like, we're just talking about how long. We're not talking about if, but when.
Right. Well, and then, so going back to this 1.0 thing that, an exemplar problem, when reality hits and you get in the market, now you have to iterate. If it's well architected, and you're an experienced architect or builder, you can build, kind of what's going to happen, right? Or there's a couple scenarios that are likely. And you probably, plumb those in, so, what happens when you do have to iterate, or when you do have like a schizo, business, finding where all of a sudden now you're working on a different problem. How do you shift gears? Those are all always difficult. And that's where I worry, the human factor. Humans can handle the chaos. AI is great at things it's seen before.
That's right.
I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I don't know the AIs. I don't know we're going to have brilliant MBA types that are great at finance and can just talk to a computer and get a great app, that's going to scale and do all the wonderful things for a while. But
yeah, it's going to be a while. But there's going to be interesting findings, I think. I was talking to an entrepreneur this morning that's building an AI around, kind of around a digital CFO. He started with it because he was doing lending. And so to build this lending business, which didn't really take off, it's like business to business lending. The way it took off though was like he had to, the way he, is a perfect example for AI. He had to pull all this data from your QuickBooks and from your operations system so he had all these data sources, and they were using that to do due diligence for how much creditworthiness and what's your creditworthiness score for buy now, pay it later kind of lending, but for businesses. And that didn't quite take off, but what they kind of ended up building was an AI because they had all this data. They could build an AI that could help you understand problems in your business from a financial standpoint. And that has all of a sudden rocketed because they've been able to get all these really good data sources. And I think that's a perfect example. So is it going to replace the CFO? No, but they already are able to see insights into the business that even a really experienced CFO might not see, or you may not have access to in a smaller business. So I think those are the early kind of early indications of some really interesting opportunities. Is it going to replace people? I think probably not. That hasn't really happened. Will skills shift? Absolutely. Skills will shift. They always will. It doesn't matter whether it's AI or the next thing.
So what's the next big thing? What do you get your eye on? Obviously agentic architectures is a thing now that you're going after. Where does that all lead? Or what's,
Yeah, I think, me and the other co-founders, our fundamental belief is, the cloud has to change, the cloud infrastructure, and I'm just going to call it cloud loosely. Today, if you look at today's cloud, it's built around low latency, global based edge computing and sessionless sessionless architectures, which makes sense for where we're at. Edge devices, mobile devices, IoT devices, desktop computers, etc. But agents need something different. And so that's sort of our they're not going to be low latency probably. They're going to probably go work for hours and days at a time, and they're going to be always on, and there's probably going to be way more of them. And where the proximity to the edge device probably doesn't matter as much as the proximity to the LLM and to the GPU and to the data source, the proprietary data source, especially if you're a company building things. So, so then it's what happens to the cloud? What are the needs of the cloud? And energy probably becomes a much more important critical resource, and so that's kind of what we're thinking about. So it certainly is the agentic systems themselves and what do you need for agentic, sort of capabilities and the apps that are getting built. But a more fundamental problem we're thinking about is what does the modern data center look like? And what, today's modern data center was built for humans, right? And I don't just mean the physical data center. I mean also the thing that we interact with. We have visualization dashboards so we can visualize logs and, Prometheus metrics and all those things. Those are built for humans. And they're about human factors, right? And and for automation, all the tools that have been built were for humans. AI doesn't need any of that. And certainly agentic systems need different things, right? It doesn't need pretty charts and graphs. It could just use the underlying low level data. And so that's kind of the big thing that we've been thinking about, the next $1 trillion opportunity and frankly, disruption is what happens. And now all those cloud providers aren't going to go anywhere. And certainly all the workloads aren't going to go anywhere. They're going to continue to grow because we're still going to need mainframes and we're still going to need mobile devices. But agents are going to need something different. And that's kind of been our big thing.
Do you think it's centralized or decentralized?
No, I think it's highly decentralized. I think there's, I think we're seeing this already with the cloud. There's a big repatriation, especially in the larger companies, but even smaller, mid-sized companies that are spending huge amounts of money. There's a pretty big repatriation. And I think, we're going to see, especially with land use and energy use and how that's going to get nationalized. I think we're going to see a much bigger decentralization of infrastructure away from, at least for maybe the next gen. Maybe legacy things stay where they are and maybe that changes differently. But certainly for next gen type agentic systems, I think we're going to see a different. I don't think we're going to see, personally, I just don't think we're going to see Amazon dominating all of that by themselves.
So I got a buddy in the hometown, it's an hour south of Atlanta, and he's got a old family farm, 500 acres or something. He did out say, I'm going to build a data center. It's going to be back in the woods, and then we all kind of went, yeah, you don't know what you're getting into. But, he needs electric, there's a river that goes by there, so he's got cooling. He needs cheap power from the river.
That's right.
He needs internet, right? So I'm not sure.
I think he's onto something. So I don't know, but I think he's onto something. I mean, me and my other co-founder this morning, we're driving by a couple of really big buildings here in Austin, and we're saying, all right, we're gonna get that building. We're gonna build a data center in that. I mean, what a perfect building, low cost warehouse space, easy access to a massive power grid here in Texas, relatively low cost power here in Texas, and internet access is pretty plentiful. And so again, I don't know. We'll see. I don't know how the decentralization works at scale because you can't put every farm can't have a data center.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out. There's definitely a lot of energy, a lot of really smart people thinking through these problems for sure. So it's going to be really cool to see what happens. It's about travel and getting out the world. And, I know you're probably a million miler on a couple different airlines. So you got any great travel stories you want to share with us? Oh my
God, I've got so many great travel stories. Where do I even start? The funniest, I don't know if it's funny. It's probably two-part funny. Funny and not so funny, and just kind of the realities of travel. Me and my head of sales, this is back at Appcelerator, we were coming from Japan. So we were doing like a worldwide 2-week trip, which is really difficult when you go cross world, especially, we went from, Japan, and we did Korea and a few other places all the way to the Middle East. And we did, Abu Dhabi, and we did Spain and a couple other places, then eventually back to San Francisco, and trying to carry 2 weeks worth of clothing and different, it's snowing in Japan and of course, get in the desert, in Abu Dhabi, and sort of, and Madrid and Spain. And so that was really crazy. But the funniest thing was, so we were going to a event in Spain, and we were kind of a little bit last minute and booking. And so my assistant was like, just book something. We just need a flat. We don't care. We're just going to fly in. We're going to be there a couple of days, and we're going to be gone, and we're traveling. This is the end of our trip. So we get to, it's like we've been traveling. I think we flew from, I think it was Korea. I forgot where we flew from. I think it was either Korea or somewhere else. And we flew all the way into Madrid. We get there. So, we've been traveling, feels like, for 2 days. We get there. It's late at night. We go to check into our hotel, and we can only get one room. So we're like, no problem. Just get one room and just get a double, right? Europe.
Don't care.
So just get a double. We don't care, we're traveling together all the time. We, whatever, business guys, it doesn't really matter. So we check into this hotel. We're tired. We get it. We come in. We got a double, 2 beds. But in Europe, a double is really like a single, like a small little bed squished together, especially sorry, I said Madrid. We were in Barcelona. So in Barcelona, in a little flat, and literally it was a double, what would call a double in America, a small bed. That was like the bed. So, and we were both, and we were 2 relatively, tall dudes, so that was sort of we ended up having to stay there for 2 days, literally sleeping in the same bed together. It's like, you turn this way, you turn that way. And there was nothing we could do because there was no hotels, no flats left. It was one of those huge, events in the city. And so then to finalize the story. So then we're like, okay, whatever, 2 days, doesn't matter. Who cares? Full of meetings, 2 days. We get on we're exhausted. It's been 2 weeks. We've gone on the road traveling. Finally going to get on our flight, on an El Al flight, direct from Barcelona to San Francisco. The longest flight I think I've ever been on in my life. It was like a 13 or 12 and a half hour flight, or 13 hours, something that's very long. So we get on this flight, and they put us on the last row, huge El Al flight, last row in the middle, back up against the lavatories. And on these long flights where people congregate on the long flights in the lavatory, like at the end where the, lavatories are, and they slam them all, slam, open, slam. And we're trying to sleep. So we get on this plane. First class is completely empty because it's like a $15,000 or $20,000 first class. There's one dude from the Middle East with a freaking hawk, literally on his, or whatever they call. I think they're falcons. I think they call them, right? And there's nobody else in first class or business class. I think business class maybe had 2 or 3 people in it, but it's virtually empty. So at the gate, we're like, we want to upgrade. We'll upgrade right now. How do we upgrade? Because we looked at our seats and we're like, we got to upgrade. And they're like, you can't, it's too late. You have to upgrade with the bursar on the plane. And we're like, okay, but can we, is there seats? Oh yeah, plenty of seats. You just upgrade with the bursar on the plane. They'll let you upgrade. So we get on the plane, we call get in our seats, we call the bursar comes back. We're like, we would like to move to, business class, right now. We'll just pay it right now. And they're like, she's like, I think she said, $10,000 each. And we're like, $10,000? It's empty. The plane doors are going to close in a minute, right? Like, we're like, no, we'll give you $2,000 each of us, right? Like $2,000 right now, $2,000. They literally El Al would, or I said El Al, I meant, the other, sorry, not El Al, that's Israeli. The other, Middle Eastern, airline, I can't think of the name of it.
Qatar.
Qatar, yeah. And they were like, no, they wouldn't do it. Like we went 2,000, they went to 3,000. And I think we went to $4,000, because we were so desperate, and she would literally not do it at all. And so we ended up just sitting just literally like this the whole time. Both, there was like a 4-seater in the middle. We were sitting like this the whole time, 13-hour flight, longest flight I'd ever been on. It was awful.
I couldn't do that.
And that's, it was so bad. But we were just like, it must be nice to be, a rich company that doesn't need the money. So.
Jeez, holy smokes. That's awful. Well, Jeff, it's been awesome catching up with you. I'm glad you're doing well. We look forward to your launch in Miami here in a little bit. And, if people want to, get in touch with you and follow up with any of this stuff afterwards, what's a great way on the internet?
It's Agentuity, Agentuity.com. It's our website, or you can email me. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter, Jay Haynie. I'm really easy to find. Pretty public. Feel free to reach out to me, and we'd love to talk to you. Love to talk to you about your agent use cases, or maybe like just in general, like what are you trying to automate, or what are you trying to do?
It's been good having you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Bye for now.
Thanks for joining us in the Sky Lounge. Please like and subscribe to hear more from Tales from the Sky Lounge here and anywhere else you get your podcasts.